Welcome to the Shift Method Podcast. I'm your host, Coach D. My goal is to shift the culture of health and fitness through evidence-based coaching and engaging content for the public and health fitness professionals alike. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode. What's good, everyone? Coach D here with the Shift Method Podcast. Hope everyone's having a great day. I get to say we have a doctor in the house today. This is very exciting. And he's going to not say, he's like, oh, call me this, call me that. I'm going to call him by his name because he's my friend. But just know, out of respect, we have a doctor on the podcast, which I'm very excited to talk about because as we see in the fitness industry, we're having a lot of changes where, medicine is becoming a more integral part in how we look at practice and also how we look at, our allied healthcare continuum and how we refer people out. The medical field is becoming ever more important with regards to health and fitness. And so having a medical professional on is something that I'm very excited about. Before I introduce my awesome guests, just a couple of reminders. This is episode number 51 of the Shift Method Podcast, coming out on Monday, September 11th. By now, the blog post number 2 on that kind of obesity series we got should be out. So be sure y'all read that article and check out that video. Remember, we got a lot of podcasts outside of my guest interviews where I kind of just talk about various topics. So we're on the obesity conversation here, and that video should be up on Spotify and on YouTube. Also, the September newsletter will have already come out. So if you missed this one, no worries. You just head to theshiftmethod.org. As soon as you go onto the page, it'll ask you to just put your name and email, and you can jump onto the monthly newsletter. All of the content I create for YouTube and Spotify is there. Any major updates, any sales that are going on for apparel or programs, you'll want to make sure you subscribe to that so you get the latest and greatest of what's going on in my life and for the business. But enough about me. Y'all know basically all that stuff already. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. Thank you so much. If you're new, welcome to the podcast. This is episode again, number 51. And like I mentioned, we have a doctor here, and this is someone who I got to know at my time at Purdue University. If you can see my man here, he's got his personal training polo on, and he's in Hawaii right now, as you can. No, I'm just kidding. It's just the background he's got on. But this is someone who I had the opportunity to work alongside with, develop a good relationship with my time as a GA at Purdue University. He was a personal trainer, and he had the opportunity to go to med school, and now he is working through his residency. And I'll let him kind of explain all his awesome and amazing background. And that is my friend, Dr. Punit Vyas. Punit, do you mind introducing yourself to the people, please?
Sure. Thank you so much, Damien, for that introduction. My name is Punit. That's what I will go by on the podcast. But yeah, I had the opportunity to work with Damien at Purdue. I'm a proud Boilermaker, so I know that I did my medical school at Indiana University and loved the program. Great people, great training there. But I brought this to make sure everyone knows that I still wear my boiler pride in the hospital.
Yes.
And now I am in Nashville at Vanderbilt Medical Center doing my residency training in general surgery.
Very nice. Very nice. And so, yeah, as Punit mentioned, a very unique background, which I've noticed is, increasingly becoming more popular, is having that blend of medicine with the personal training or just general fitness side of things. And so having someone is kind of like that dual threat where I talk about, you have a dietitian who's a personal trainer, having someone who's a doctor and was a personal trainer. It's going to be cool to get a unique perspective in that regard. But as always, this is the Shift Method Podcast. So we got to learn more about our guests and kind of their background in general. So Punit, this will be a cool story for me to hear, man, because it's been a long time since we kind of talked about, your background. How did you get into fitness, like personally for yourself? Like what was kind of that catalyst for you?
Sure. Catalyst for me is maybe a sad story. I don't know. Terrible football athlete in high school, vastly undersized, trying to play receiver at, I don't know, at that time, 5'6", 130 pounds. Not that I've grown too much since then, but that's really what sparked my interest in fitness and exercise. I had some fantastic strength and conditioning coaches in high school that really set the stage for detail-oriented and evidence-based exercise performance training. And so I really dove into it. It didn't actually lead to a lot more playing time, I can say, but it really kind of set the footsteps for me moving forward and how I wanted to approach fitness and kind of intertwine it into my own personal life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. And while, you didn't make it to, walk on at Purdue, not a bad basketball player, man. Not a bad basketball player at all. This man, I didn't even realize it. We were just, people who listen to the podcast, they know I love playing basketball. A couple of my friends have been on here, like Brendan Adams. They know we're very competitive, recreational players, if you will. And one day I find out, my friend Brendan's like, "Did you know Punit plays?" I'm like, "What?" And I go on the court. This man, he's got all the gear on. He's ready to go, and he's freaking, cooking it up on the court. So yeah, that was very cool to find out that you were also interested in basketball, and we got to play together a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It might have been a better sport choice for me considering my frame, but it was so much fun playing back at Purdue. I miss those days a lot.
Yeah, man. With how busy you are, I would imagine it's probably no. But do you have any time to still play at all?
I have not hooped in, oh, that's depressing to think. Probably close to a year, maybe a year and a half.
Oh man,
Um, it's difficult, the Purdue gym had so many courts
so many.
available and people around. When I went to Indianapolis, you couldn't really find good courts for pickup
Mm.
games. And here so far in Nashville, I haven't quite found a little club center, but I'm looking for a little place to get some pickup ball again.
Yeah, man. Well, if you ever take a little vacation down to Fort Lauderdale, Miami, we'll get some reps and it'll be fun.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, thank you for letting us know about that. Now, of course, obviously, like we mentioned, you were also a personal trainer. And so like you got into fitness, you were interested in sports. What made you want to then transition into kind of like a little bit of a career path early on of being a personal trainer?
Yeah. I think when I started looking into some of the research and science behind it in high school, I kind of fell in love with the anatomy and physiology of exercise itself. And I knew coming out of high school that I wanted to be a doctor. However, the way that education is set up, you have to do 4 years of undergraduate studies in something else prior to medical school. And so being a personal trainer was kind of like an avenue where I could impact people's physical lives and kind of be involved in their care in a different way prior to being a doctor or going to medical school. And so it was a neat way to, see a lot of the parallels between medicine and personal training, motivational interviewing,
Mm-hmm.
talking through, barriers to exercise and really falling into the science behind it. And so that's kind of what got me into the space of personal training at first, and definitely what's keeping me in it too is that blend.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's cool. As I listen to some other people, like I follow the barbell medicine crew, who they have a similar route where they are strength and conditioning coaches, mainly in the powerlifting world, but they do a wide spectrum of clientele. Um, as someone who is like up and coming and interested, like knowing from a young age, like I want to be in the medical field, be a doctor. That's cool because it's like the best situation for practicing those soft skills and like your research, right? Your curiosity. So it's like, hey, I have a client, 40-year-old female who has PCOS and I need to help her with some confidence issues she has in the gym. You build that motivational interviewing, which client and doctor, you got, or patient and doctor rather, you have to know those skills. You can't be a robot with people, but then also getting some soft exposure to different medications, different, risk factors and medical issues that you on your own time were probably already preparing for, but you get like real live tests before you even get to like residency or get into medical school, which must have been, I imagine, very beneficial for you in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. I think the softer skills of talking to clients or patients definitely is something that carried forward really well. You get to you really, I think what was really cool to me is when you're in the medical school world or even now as a physician when you're talking to patients about that lifestyle modifications thing that
Yes,
we
yes.
all like to say, you really get to have a different sense of what that means for a patient, instead of just saying it or writing it down on a note. Having that conversation as far as what does it mean for the patient, what are their actual tangible goals in those lifestyle modifications, and how can we make it happen So I think it was really neat to see the other side of it before saying lifestyle modifications, to see how clients would come to you and say, hey, this is, where I'm at in my physical health, and I need to do X, Y, and Z to be in better shape, or these are my goals.
Yeah, it
So
gives
it was
you
a
a
really
good,
neat transition.
absolutely. It gives you like a training ground for how do I implement strategies to help people change behavior, right? Because I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, ultimately in medicine, yes, obviously the prescription and the regimens, et cetera, but the medicine doesn't work if people don't take it, or the regimen and the protocols don't work if people don't follow through. So ultimately, as a doctor, the goal is to help people change and alter their behavior to be healthier and more health sustaining, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the same thing for personal training, man. Like I say, you can write a great program, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if people don't follow it, and if you can't help, and obviously there's complicated nuances with how to help facilitate behavior change, but if you can focus on that and help people change their behavior and make small incremental changes to work towards behavior change, that is what's going to be meaningful in the long term for people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely those small steps and communicating,
Yes,
what, the simple and small steps that people can take to move in that direction.
absolutely, man. Now, I'm curious how this has kind of like maybe shaped your outlook. I always ask people like their fitness philosophy, like what fitness or health means to them. Um, do you kind of have one as like from a trainer lens versus as like a medical lens, or has your view on like health and fitness shifted as you've become a medical professional? Like, what does that look like for you?
Um, I don't know that my philosophy or view has changed too much. I think if I could phrase it, I I like to think that a lot of the stuff that we do can be simplified, from a personal training and a medical perspective. That it doesn't have to be complicated, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something. And what I really try to harp on with clients or patients in that sense is that the research backs the simple stuff really well. There's a lot of research on a ton of different like supplements that you could take, or
Mhm.
training pathways, training paradigms, as far as maximizing muscle mass or fat loss, or what have it. But the best research on the simple stuff, walking 30 minutes a day, something like that,
Mhm.
as far as cardiovascular risk, mortality, and patients' quality of life, that research is really good. And so what I like to emphasize is keeping it simple, do the basics first, and don't worry about all that stuff until you're really there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I forget where the acronym comes from, but I hear it all the time in our industry is KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right?
Yeah,
Like
keep it
that
simple, stupid.
for, you know, 80-90% of people, especially if you're just like a trainer in the general population, that's going to work and serve you very well. Like, obviously, when you're really into this, like you love, like you and I do, like the anatomy, the physiology, like you read these like cool training principles, these cool like metabolic pathways. You're like, wow, that's so amazing. But most people don't care about that as our clients or patients. And so our job is to like dumb it down and turn it into like, you need to walk for 30 minutes. Like they don't care about ATP pathways and all that stuff. And in terms of programming, I tell people, and this is not to diminish like what we as coaches do, because I think we're extremely valuable. But I think sometimes we try and I don't know if it's a lack of confidence as a young coach. It's like we try to like overvalue what we do by making things complicated to seem like we're needed, if that makes sense. So it's like, hey, rather than just like getting someone to lift twice a week, doing basic compound lifts, and then do conditioning, try and aim for those 150 minutes a week, it's like, no, we're going to do single leg Bosu ball pistol squats with your eyes closed. And it's like, okay, maybe that's fun for people, but why? Like, you don't have to make yourself seem like this very unique person and that does unique things for the sake of being unique. Like, if you do the basics and do it well and do those soft skills very well, for most people, your program doesn't matter so much so long as it's safe, it's progressive over time, and you're targeting the major pathways and muscle groups. That's really all that matters. And there's a lot of ways you can get there, but you don't have to overcomplicate it. I'd even argue in the athletic realm until you get to like the very high end athlete, like, the Tyreek Hills and the LeBron James that have like been training for so long, and they have all like the repertoire and they have the muscle mass and everything. Like, okay, advanced principles can be beneficial for them. But a lot of youth athletes, a lot of like athletes that are starting out, like you still got to build a foundation, and you don't need to do anything too crazy before you need to like, try and push them towards their goal. Just keep it relatively simple.
Agreed. I could not second that as much as I would want to. That is perfectly said. I think the only thing I would add is you mentioned like for some of our professional athletes that they may have some advanced principles. The only thing I would say is 99% of what they're doing is still the simple stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just that like 1% that they may tag on to doing some intricate training paradigm or pathway. And so I think from our trainer's lens, you can really like take a step back and look and say, seeing young trainers that may have these complicated programs, you look at it and you can say, these are good if your client likes it, if they're excited about it, and if it's safe. But you might as well get away with 4 sets of 10 on back squat and you would be just fine.
Absolutely.
But if you want to do the post to ball pistol squats with your eyes closed, and the patient or client is safe, by all means. I think it's reasonable. And I think some of that comes with experience for young trainers as they start to realize, the effect of what they're doing is really getting them that exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the one caveat, because I've found myself doing this as a coach where I started off on the other end where it's like super advanced, got to do a bunch of stuff. And then I've gone to like the super, super basic. It's like you have to have a little bit of things that make it fun and exciting, even if it's not the most quote unquote evidence-based, because people aren't robots. Like I said, they can get bored. So adding things to make it fun and engaging is important, but you don't have to make everything like that all the time. You can find other ways to make it fun. You can do friendly competition with your client or, with themselves, where it's like, hey, this was your number last time in this 500-meter row. Can you beat it? Or maybe it's the way you structure your workouts, whether it's supersets or circuits, or, changing up the like load to see if they can lift heavier. Like there's small things you can do that are still evidence-based that don't make your program look like a circus show, essentially.
Agree.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again for kind of sharing like your little background into fitness side of things. I want to kind of get into now the medical school side of it. So this is the first time I get to talk with someone in depth about, how they got into med school and kind of like that process. And maybe if we got some listeners, because a lot of them are exercise science or in the health field based, what that process might be like. So we kind of talked a little bit about, why you wanted to become a doctor. Do you have any like advice to like young students who are thinking about going to med school or who are kind of like starting their journey into med school that you wish you got when you were on your way up?
Sure. I think, as far as advice that I could give is stick with it and don't be shocked by it being a long journey.
Mm-hmm.
I think that at the age of like 17 or 18, I thought, and maybe I was misinformed, but I thought that, undergraduate and then medical school, it's 8 years and I'm out. I'm on a boat and enjoying my life as a doctor. That's kind of like the conception I had. It's obviously not what I valued in being a doctor, but it was kind of the image that I had created in my mind. I'm not on a boat currently. I'm not actually in Hawaii.
I was going to say, you did.
I know. I have several years of residency training, which I'm grateful for, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I think at the age of 17 or 18, that was just something that I didn't really understand or anticipate. As far as like the journey into medical school, I think if I could ask myself to do one thing over again, really it would just be, doing the things that I really want to do and making those passions that I have kind of line up well with my medical training. So I guess what I mean by that is personal training for me has been something that I thought that I would have to kind of separate from medical school. I thought, I love personal training. I really enjoy like doing this, but the time for that is done, I am now in medical school, and there won't be a way to kind of connect those worlds. But I found a lot more like satisfaction and reward, like during my third and fourth year of medical school, when I just kind of said, screw it, let's see if we can just kind of do both at once and bring both worlds together. And I think it accelerated my professional career in medicine, and it gave me a lot of that reward and kind of filled the gap of what I felt like was missing.
Yeah.
And so I just wish I didn't wait till third year in medical school to do that, and just kind of right out of the gates coming out of Purdue was like, I'm going to keep going with this.
Yeah.
And so that's the main advice I think I would have is, find your passions, whether they're in medicine or not, and try to keep them going, because you can really lean on them when you're struggling with time or what have it in life.
I love that, man. And to be blunt about this, I am not as busy as a residency person or doctor, right? So I can only imagine the time. Before we got on the podcast, Punit's like first day off in 14 days. I was like, oh my God, dude, that's insane. But I think it's refreshing to hear about, still making time for yourself and things that are important to you. Because what I always tell people, and this isn't to be dismissive, because I've been there. I do 12 to 14-hour days. I work sometimes 7 days a week in some capacity. And so I tell people it's, make time. You have to find ways to make time for it. And you're always going to be busy in one way or another. Whether it's like, if you're in college, obviously you have a little bit more freedom, give or take. Or if you're in high school, you have a little more freedom. But by then you're still trying to figure out life. And so you're like, oh, when I'm out of college, now you have a full-time job. Oh, when I'm comfortable with my job in 2-3 years, it's like, well, now you got a promotion and you're learning a new job. Oh, once I get settled in, then now you have a spouse and a family. Oh, when the kids are out of school, well, now there's your life. And so you kept kicking the can down the road, thinking that life was going to get, simpler and not as busy, when I'd argue probably the contrary for most things, that time will still always find ways to slip away from you. And so making an effort, and it doesn't have to be large. It doesn't have to be, 10, 12 hours a day. Just carving out those little spaces for yourself is going to be good for, your mental health, just to help satisfy kind of that itch, whatever creative itch or self-pleasing itch that you may have. And just better way for you to kind of live your life, so you don't feel like you're constantly having to push back the things that are important to you.
Agreed. I had this conversation with a personal training client of mine who is a 2 years behind, so I guess a third-year medical student, and we were chatting about finding time to exercise and how the time's dwindling, and I just don't have time now. And I completely understand. I feel like I was there too, where you feel like the time is caving in on you, and you don't have time to do the basics of life, let alone get some exercise. And the conversation we had was, it's not going to necessarily get a whole lot better.
Yeah.
Fourth year will come, and then you'll have residency training. And, for me, some days it's doing 10 minutes of push-ups and planks before I go in the morning.
Yeah.
And just kind of being reasonable that, time is something that we're always going to battle. And I think sometimes, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes I feel like everyone's in their own little bubble of like being busy.
Yes.
Like I definitely feel like when I was a med student, I was like, I'm way busier than anybody else. Like I might not have time to, but like the reality is like you maybe, but like at the same time, there's a lot of people that are really freaking busy too. There are a lot of people that, may say I have a 9-to-5 job, but they have 4 kids and they take their kids to, school in the morning, pick them up, and, are managing things as maybe a single parent. Like that's not my current life and obligations right now. But it's somebody else's.
Yeah.
And that's probably just as busy, if not more, or more stressful. So I like to try and challenge people to get out of that bubble and
Absolutely.
say, this might just be the way time exists for people. And we have to kind of control that to the best of our ability.
No, 100%, man. I also really like to hear that. So correct me if I'm wrong. Did you say you still have clients right now that you're actively training some people?
I do.
Let's go.
I am. I started back 6 months ago.
Yes.
So I am picking up clients again, slowly. I have 2 other personal trainers that are helping out with this. And so we're kind of grabbing a little niche, I guess, in the personal training space between exercise and medicine. So it's been exciting, and a lot of fun, I think.
That's amazing, man. That makes me so excited because, again, I think that, like, yes, the RD is really good too. That's like another dual threat, like I mentioned, but the doctor one is like, that's so cool. It's like, oh, PAR-Q. Well, let's talk about these medications. I know a little bit more than your standard personal trainer, so that is like a really cool thing, man. Is it online, in person, hybrid? What's like the structure look like for you?
So it's online. It's virtual. The website is path2.fit, is the website, a name. And like you said, I think the cool thing, or the thing that I'm super excited about, is kind of building that healthcare network. So you mentioned the PAR-Q, and as we know, if we have a lot of risk factors on the PAR-Q, we suggest getting medical clearance. And so this is something where in the space, what we'll have is one of the personal trainers on our team will basically bring it forward and say, hey, this PAR-Q did not pass, and that comes to me. And then I get to have a phone-to-phone conversation with their primary care provider. And that conversation can be a little more informative for our clients, with my background. And so it's something that I'm really excited about kind of connecting that space, to help people get safe and effective personal training, when they need it.
Absolutely, man. And people don't realize, sometimes the seemingly simplest barriers are the ones that keep people from being active. So, like, obviously, from like a safety rule of thumb, PAR-Q, for those who don't know, is a medical history questionnaire, generally about 7-ish questions, give or take, where it asks, like, do you have a heart problem or a breathing problem or anything with bone or joint issues? And so generally if someone checks yes, unless they do like a PAR Med-X where it like goes into further detail and you can kind of, stipulate, oh, this is okay. If they check yes, they more or less have to go to their doctor. Now, thankfully today, with, the way we virtualized everything, it's a little bit easier. Maybe you can do a telehealth call or Zoom, and they can just fax it and sign it over. No problem. But that can still a lot of times be a barrier for people, where as a trainer, you're like, hey, I gotta cover myself liability wise and protect my client/patient to make sure they're safe. But now that I've told them, hey, you got to do this additional step, that may be the last time I hear from them, sadly. And it's happened, time and time again with myself as a young coach and with other coaches, where they're like, hey, I know we sent this person to get medical clearance. They ever get back? It's like, I can't get a hold of them. Maybe they're, maybe it's a time thing where they're so busy and they like took that step and now it's like one other thing and they say, fuck it. Or it's a health insurance thing where they're like maybe transitioning, where they don't have the cash right now to add that additional charge on their, lifestyle. And so having that like resource for you and your coaches, man, like that's really, really convenient.
Yeah, it's something that I've gotten a lot of good feedback so far from, and the primary care providers have been very responsive, so far. And as a personal trainer, I felt like sometimes when I made that phone call I think I maybe did it only a handful of times, making a phone call to a family practice doctor to say, hey, I've got, so-and-so who is going to be a client of mine for personal training, wanted to chat about some things. I found it really hard. I don't know if you've had this, but I found it really hard to like actually get the doctor on the phone. Like,
yeah, it's extremely
as
difficult.
I would be talking to ancillary staff
Yeah.
or somebody at the front desk, and they'd write down like,
Like,
my
oh, I'll get the
name.
note. I'll get back to them.
Yeah, and I really never heard then, and that was the end of it, and it was very discouraging. And to be honest, it led to me not making that phone call as many times. I would kind of wait to hear back from my client. I might reach out to my client again, but I didn't really feel like reaching out to the provider was as useful. So far, the 2 times that I've done it, early on so far, it's gone well. And I think that having the background saying that, I am another doctor in the space, I am trying to talk about a patient and reframing it as like a patient rather than a client, I think has helped navigate that communication. But we'll see how it goes. I'm excited about, you know, where it'll be in the next several years.
Yeah, man. That's so, I'm so happy to hear that. That makes me very, very excited for you, man. A little bit. So you're in Nashville. You're currently going through residency. You said, correct me if I'm wrong, surgery.
Yes.
What is that experience like so far? Can you kind of like go into like your role a little bit more and like what it's been like for you, man, to get and absorb everything?
Sure. For anyone who doesn't know, I guess the pathway for us out of medical school is we go into residency training, which is you're an MD or a DO, and you basically are able to practice under some set of supervision. And it's basically supervision to train and practice and learn over a set number of years. And so I pursued general surgery. So I am in Nashville at Vanderbilt for 5 to 7 years, where I will practice as a resident physician. What that entails is it's supervision as appropriate. So, you know, a lot of what we do is we take care of patients pre-operatively, post-operatively, and then in the operating room under supervision, we get to kind of train and learn to basically practice independently by the end of our residency training. It's a lot. I would say the learning curve is definitely steep. You come out of medical school and you think you know things, and then day one, you're like trying to log on to the computer, and there's like 4 people asking you to do something, and you're like, I don't know how to log on yet.
I just work here, man.
Yeah, like I don't know what to do. You know, and it's there's a learning curve, I think, but it's been really really fun so far. Like I really felt like, you know, having the ability to kind of start taking care of patients and starting to kind of have, you know, building your own relationship as their doctor has been really, really rewarding in just 6 weeks at this point.
Yeah.
I guess that's 6 weeks.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I would imagine because surgery is a very vague term in a sense, because surgery can encapsulate a lot of things outside of like the specialty route, like an orthopedic surgeon or a, you know, ACL reconstruction or whatever it may be. So it sounds like, vague in general as surgery may sound, you have to have a very wide scope of knowledge because that surgery could range from a number of things, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I'm in the general surgery program, and like you said, there are like orthopedic programs where it's just, you know, bone and musculoskeletal conditions. The general surgery route is a little more general. So there's a lot more medicine and physiology, I think, involved in that residency training pathway. It's definitely really cool, like the amount of the variety that you see.
I imagine.
And so I love it. Like I think I'm having, even after long hours, I'm having a great time at the end of the day on most days. Some days, you know, highs and lows. But overall it's been good.
What all like encapsulates general surgery? Like, would that be like hernia surgery? Like what kind of fits in that lens so I can kind of conceptualize that?
Sure. Belly. That's, I guess,
Okay.
the best way that I would explain it. Belly surgery. So your hernias, your gallbladders, your appendix. Now, with the way medicine is kind of slowly evolving, is there's more and more subspecialists. And so, you know, if let's say a patient has colon cancer, technically that falls under the general surgery scope. We work on the colon and the intestine. But there's also, after general surgery, there are people that will subspecialize to a fellowship into colorectal surgery.
Gotcha.
And so it's like general surgery is like this big umbrella where over the 5 to 7 years, I'll get exposure and training in all these different areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I wanted to practice as more of a generalist, take care of some colons, take care of some appendix, some gallbladder, some hernias. I could remain in that general field. Or if I really wanted to say, you know, I want to become really advanced in my training at colon surgery, I could do a fellowship after general surgery under colorectal.
Gotcha.
So like there's another one like HPB, which is hepatobiliary surgery, hepatopancreatobiliary. But essentially what that is your liver, your gallbladder, and your pancreas, which again fall under the general surgery box. But some more advanced and specialized procedures are under those kind of subspecialty training.
Gotcha. That's nice so that you have, if you find something like you really find a niche, like, ooh, like I really like this, you have the opportunity to then go in and become more advanced in your profession, or I guess advance in your surgical practice if you'd like to help people in that particular area.
Exactly. I like that aspect of it, that you get that wide training. And as time goes, as kind of I mature in my surgical education, I can kind of see what suits me best.
That's very cool, man. The yeah, I also more so on the orthopedic side, I find medical stuff very fascinating. The human body is such an amazing thing. And so, I've watched the in class like the ACL reconstructions and the knee reconstructions, man, and it's amazing what we can do first and foremost. Like someone who they come in and their knee is the size of a cinder block, and then 6-8 months later they're out on the field again, and it's like, wow, like the things that we can do today, man, is amazing. So I imagine that's probably a surreal feeling when you get to witness and participate in these things that are saving people's lives and improving their quality of life overall.
Yeah, it's the reward is definitely worth the time and the training. I think when we were, a few of my co-residents and I were reminiscing on just the feeling when you see a patient in clinic, a couple weeks after their operation, whatever operation it may be, and they're telling you like they're essentially the belly pain they've been dealing with for months or years is gone.
Wow.
And you like, it's a very simple clinic visit from our perspective. We like make sure they're doing okay and we're happy for them and we're checking up on them, making sure things look good. But you look at that and you're just like, you walk away and you're like, we did something for this person. And in my eyes, kind of from the personal training background, I look at that and I'm like, this person now can exercise.
Hey, that's right.
One of those barriers to moving and being mobile and taking the stairs instead of the elevators, those things, if you have chronic abdominal pain that worsens when you move, probably not going to want to take the stairs. But
Absolutely.
now maybe we can. And so for me, I see that as kind of a lot of ways where you get that satisfaction, and it's really helping someone.
Yeah, man. One of the top self-reported reasons people don't participate in physical activity is disability. And so, there's a lot of people in this country and globally as well, but, keeping it to the States here for us, that have disabilities, man. They have abdominal pain. They have a secondary or primary medical condition that, whether it's the side effects of the medicine or just like the primary issues of the disease itself, it's like, exercise is already hard enough as it is. It's like, oh, let's add on like, throbbing headaches and knee pain and X, Y, and Z. It's like, no wonder people don't want to exercise because it freaking sucks for them. And so being able to kind of like help alleviate, or even in some cases, which is so cool, like eliminate that barrier for people, that's gotta feel so good, man.
Yeah, it definitely, it's one of those things that I think I at least look back at as definitely a why for me when I came into the medical field, and even personal training was one of those whys, was that feeling. I feel like it's really hard to explain when you're asked to put it in words, right? They're like, why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a personal trainer? And like, I can see that moment where I'm like, that's why, when I remember one of my old clients, their biggest goal was to take the stairs to like the 7th or 8th floor in the math department. they were like, I want to be able to take the stairs, but I can't. I take the elevators. And, 6 months later, he's telling me how, he does it twice on his way up and down. Like he gets there a little early so he can take the stairs. And he was just so happy,
That's what's
to
up,
be
man.
able to say, like, I'm taking the stairs now and it's not hard.
Yeah.
And I think those like moments, I think build people's why in what
Yes.
they do. And so that's what I really fell in love with it.
I think what also is a good selling point for you and in general is that you're someone I know who's active. Like, and this is no disrespect to doctors at all, but like not all medical professionals, and even not all coaches are active people. And so when you're trying to ask people to make changes, number one, just like how personal trainers are hugely ignorant of the medical system, sometimes doctors, because they're so specialized in their field, they don't know everything about exercise because they're not trained in detail about it. And so it's already hard to make recommendations as it is. But on top of that, it's hard to talk about it because if you don't practice it, it's hard to speak. You know about it because you have a coaching background and a passion for fitness, and you actively do it. And so I feel like for you, that's like, oh, look, my doctor is someone who's active, someone who I look up to, someone in a position of power or role model. Like that's got to be helpful as well.
I think so. I hope so. I try and share whatever personal experiences that I can with patients or clients when we're talking about, on the topic of like motivational interviewing, talking about lifestyle modifications. It can be hard, I think, to relate to a lot of people. Like when you think about specifics, like I can't relate to someone, for example, in a specific context of like chronic low back pain. Fortunately, I've not had any issues with low back pain at this point in my life. But I think the thing that you can relate to is there are times when we have to push through, and there are times when, it's not going to feel great. And sometimes it's got to get worse before it gets better. You're going to feel sore. Setting the stage for those kinds of things, I think really helps. A common conversation I've had is I had a patient that said they felt like they didn't want to exercise because it made them sore and they hurt, right? And realizing like that this was something that nobody on the team had really communicated with this patient that's okay. Like after physical therapy comes and sees you and they push you and they make you work hard, that the next day you might have some musculoskeletal soreness.
Yeah.
And just sitting down and being like, hey, like, the last time I hit legs, me walking around this unit did not look great. Like me taking the stairs like looked really messed up. And so I think just like having that conversation and personalization with like a patient and saying like, it's okay to be sore.
Yeah.
It's okay to kind of have some of these barriers to exercise. Some pain is normal.
Yes.
And really kind of eliciting the difference between pain from, positive proprioception and pain from adaptation, from pain from injury or noxious stimuli, in other words. And so I think those like conversations have been really helpful in kind of relating that.
Look at you with those pain science terms, dog. Noxious stimuli. I love to hear that. But no, you're 100% right, man. That's a conversation I have to have with people when I have clients like, oh, it hurts. I'm like, does it hurt? Or is this effort? And like, so obviously, maybe me and you, because I've played basketball with you. I think we're a little bit of masochists. Like you kind of like the feeling of being a little sore or like pushing yourself to where your lungs burn. And I get that it's not for the general person. But again, having that conversation of like, hey, first couple of weeks, like, yeah, it might suck a little bit. We're going to try to mitigate that as best as possible. But there's really no way around in the very beginning to like avoid any kind of sense of fatigue and soreness and like quote unquote pain. Right. But understanding that like the human body is resilient, man. You're in the surgery department, like people get cut open, you remove or repair parts of the body, and then you come out and what happens? You feel better long term. And so understanding that this is a natural process, you're training, this feeling of pain, soreness, fatigue, etc., is normal and will subside and get better over time. And ultimately, you are doing your mind and body a service and getting better by doing that. And then having you there as a reference, like you could say, you can relate to them on a personal, like, yeah, man, like you're going to watch me. I'm going to be like kind of doing a little limp here for the day because I am sore for the day. And that I think goes a long way for people like, oh, okay, my doc understands. He gets it. I'm going to take his advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool, man. That's so cool. Now, I also find it really cool because again, like I said, you walk the walk and talk the talk, man, because you're active. How we kind of talked about time a little bit. So like as someone who has gone through med school and is like in residency, like what does that look like for you training wise? Is it, you mentioned like, hey, I got 10 minutes to do push-ups and planks. Like, do you kind of just work out when you can and it's kind of like whatever I can do? Do you have like a structured regimen? Like what does training look like for you because of your crunch timeline?
Sure. So, I think from outside looking in, I think if I was another personal trainer looking at what it is I'm doing, I think I'd find it like as an interesting thought experiment.
Okay.
I've been creative over the past several years, I like to think. I came out of Purdue and I had a very structured lifting regimen that, circled around Olympic lifts, snatches, cleans, a lot of functional movements, and it was also dependent on the gym I had. That gym at Purdue we were talking about earlier, so nice. It had everything that I could possibly want. It was like, kid in a candy store. Everything was there. Now through medical school, I had a different gym. It wasn't as accessible, it wasn't as nice, but it was there. And it kind of, the first thing I had to do was, change some of the movements to fit the gym. And, I didn't need to do any single leg pistol squats on a BOSU ball. I got away with some free form exercises with barbells and dumbbells. And so that's kind of like, I guess, the structure of what I did. I really started to circle around what equipment that I had and, what kinds of exercises.
Yeah, you worked with what you had available.
Exactly. And then as far as time, I think it really like challenged me to first off prioritize fitness. And it was one thing that I will tell all my mentees in medical school is to write down their like 5 non-negotiables over their time in medical school. And it's okay. I say non-negotiables, but we have to negotiate them sometimes. But the idea is you write it down on a piece of paper. And one of my non-negotiables was, and I remember coming into medical school, it was like, 5 hours a week of like dedicated physical activity. And it helped kind of center that, like over some of those harder months where you're like, I feel like I don't have time, looking at that and saying, this like extra 20 minutes that I feel like I need to study for something, is it worth that 20 minutes? Is it truly worth it? Or is it kind of me and my kind of internal stress and driver to say, I need to study that for 20 minutes?
Yep.
And kind of asking myself and saying, what if I prioritize my personal health right now? And so that's kind of the first aspect of it, of how that kind of progressed through medical school, was learning to prioritize it and being okay prioritizing it. The second, I think, part of it was the actual finding time to exercise. And so that was just interesting. It was a lot of trial and error. And so when I mention this to clients in similar situations, I really try and focus on like imperfection is perfection with this. Like the only thing that you can look for is being adaptable.
Yes.
It was really frustrating coming out of Purdue thinking like, I'm going to have this progressive overload regimen for cleans. Like I'm going to come out and I'm going to be deadlifting, 4 plates or something. Like that was like the mindset. I was very numbers oriented. I really like wanted to know what my progression looked like. And then like having to like realize and say, I don't have 4 plates in this gym. So I'm going to have to find a different way to make that happen and kind of be okay with what I have. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, no, that makes
That,
complete sense, man. It's shifting your perspective on like what you thought was going to be your goal at that time. Because like you said, the biggest thing I tell coaches is like the number one quality you can have as a coach is to be adaptable. It's like my top line because again, Purdue co-rec, like you have access to everything. It's like you said, kid at candy shop. I have such free range. Well, if I have an online client that only has access to two 20-pound dumbbells and okay, well, now we're not going to be able to deadlift 315. But what can I do to help still get them towards their goal given my constraints?
Exactly. And that's, I think, what it really boiled down to over those 4 years. And even now in residency, the working on average 80 hours per week it takes time, I think, to kind of plan and prioritize health. But the thing that I really would love to I will keep holding on to this is I think that hour or 30 minutes that you put into the tank for yourself, you get more than 30 minutes to an hour back. So, it's something that I feel like, at least in my world, medical students struggle with a lot is I don't have the 30 minutes to exercise because I have to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I fight back by saying, so you have to study for 30 minutes, but what if I told, or an hour, what if I told you, you could study that instead of taking an hour to learn all that, maybe it only takes you 45 minutes or 30 minutes because you are cognitively more with it. Your retention is better. Your sleep is better. You are supplying yourself with better nutritious foods. And now, you can get through that PowerPoint one time. You don't have to rewatch it because you're cognitively functioning on all cylinders because you took care of yourself. And so that's kind of what I think helped me through medical school, is really just realizing that even when it doesn't feel like it, putting that investment into your own health carries forward cognitively and really every other part of your life.
I love that, man. Graduate assistant Damien from 2018, well, specifically 2018 to 2019, really needed to hear that statement. So yeah, I had this mindset that, more hours of work was more productive work. And that is honestly, I'd say for the most part, further from the truth. It's how efficient can you be at your work? And so what I was doing, I was maybe consistently exercising once a week for a minute there when it was getting rough. I had a supervisor get another position. So I was a little bit on my own at times. And I was like coming in at, as a GA, you work 20 hours per week in quotations. I was coming in at, between 9 and 11 a.m. and working till 10, 11 p.m. every day. And it was the volume of engagement at Purdue was crazy. I'll never forget in January alone, this number sticks in my head. We had over 100 people sign up for personal training in January 2019. That is not an exaggeration. That is a actual tangible number. I couldn't believe it. And the person who handled all the pairings and the communication engagement as one aspect of my job was me. And so that was insane. And so I'd be there at 10 o'clock at night. And I remember every night people would come by like, are you still here? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like sending emails. And it got to the point, Punit, where I would reread the email and I couldn't spell correctly. Like I got to the point where I'm like typing, I'm like, good afternoon. I'm saying the wrong name. I'm like misspelling like simple words. And like the amount of time it took me to send and review a proper email and I would still make a mistake. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Like you are no longer productive with your time. You have this like idea in your head that like you're grinding it out and like you need to work these hours to like show that you're valuable as a worker. It's like, but now I'm not even exercising. I'm like barely eating. I'm like having 2 meals a day, if that. I'm caffeinated the hell up. So it's like now I'm like wired and can't even get proper sleep. And my quality of work is going down, which that's the whole reason I'm doing this is because I want to do better work. And when I prioritize now, ever since like graduating from grad school, is like you sacrifice a little bit of time towards work for yourself. Your work quality goes up. The amount of time you need to have that quality work goes down. And so it's a win-win where something that would have taken me, 2, 3, 4 hours, I can bang out in an hour now because my mind and my body are prepared to do that laborious work versus where I'm sleep deprived, I'm nutrient deprived, and I am just burnt out and I can't even function properly.
I feel like that's something that needs to be heard around the world. So I love that is on a podcast for people to hear, because it's a snowball effect. When the ball is rolling in the right direction, things start looking really good. You get ahead of the sleep game, you get ahead of, the exercise, getting 15 or 20 minutes, just to grind out some push-ups before going into work. Something as simple as that sets the stage for my day. Makes me feel like, even if I don't get off at every single time to get into the gym today for the workout I wanted, I can say I got something done. And mentally, that makes me feel better. But there's also like a lot of physiologic benefit. Like you had mentioned, it takes you less time. That's like not just anecdote, right? That's like researched, evidence-based claim that cognitively we are better when we are exercising. Our retention is better, long-term and short-term. Our judgment making, our ability to make judgments in high stressful situations, much better when we have exercised and we have slept well. And for me, that's something that I'm like harping on for anyone in the medical field. I'm like, let's maybe, take care of ourselves so we can take care of our patients.
Exactly. Right. Take care of yourself so you can be a better practitioner. Right.
Yes.
And I like that you term that. I've been doing this, but I haven't had a term for it. So now I'm going to steal that from you. Thank you. Is your non-negotiables. Right. And so like people who know me, it's like in order to combat those unhealthy behaviors I had in grad school, people know I'm a very regimented, like calendar note-based person. All my main meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, my sleep time, and my workouts are all in my calendar. And those are non-negotiable. As Punit said, like, there's times where it's like, I got a deadline coming up for like, a clothing release or this new program or project, whatever it is. I'm sleeping 4 hours that night. You eat it, right? And Punit, 4 hours probably, he's like, oh, that sounds amazing. I'm salivating over there. That sounds like a good amount of time, right? For Coach D over here, 7 hours is my sweet spot. I usually do about 6-ish hours Monday through Thursday, and then I get a little bit more on the weekend. But, there's some times where you got to eat it and do 4 or 5 hours a couple of nights in a row. That's okay because you got to get stuff done. But I'd say 90% plus, it's like I'm going to bed and making sure I get my 6 hours minimum. I'm always making sure I eat. And even when I'm busy at work and I have a million things I can do, I can like push off food. I'm like, no, I know that I'm going to get crabby and I'm not going to perform well. And I'm going to be thinking about food. Let me take just 10 to 15 minutes and eat my food because I know it's going to make me a better worker. And of course, exercise. I always prioritize my exercise, even when I'm not feeling the best. And this isn't like for those who like David Goggins, this isn't like a David Goggins feel where it's like, you just got to suck it up. Like, even if you're sick and dying, it's like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, going even when you feel like you don't want to go, because I built a habit of it, just like brushing your teeth, just like washing your face, doing things that you may necessarily not want to do in the moment, but you're doing it because it's good for you and you've built the habit to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it.
Yes, sir. I want to get a couple last things. So again, you have that dual role, that doctor lens and that kind of personal training lens. So if you give one piece of advice to each of them, and this can be vague, like if you're talking to a young trainer, what would you tell them from like the medical lens? And if you're talking to a doctor, what's that one piece of advice you give them from Punit, the coach kind of lens to kind of help them?
So I think to the trainer, I think, I think both ways. I think the advice is very similar, is to be humble in your role. As, if you are a person's personal trainer, be humble to say you may not know what's going on with their medical care. You may not know even just their basic personal training stuff. You may not know it all. And as a personal trainer, I think it was easier for me to say that. In the medical world, it feels a lot harder to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've gotten very comfortable doing 6 weeks in, is saying, I got to look that up. I don't know. And, I'm going to learn it. But kind of on the note of people's physical health and, the personal training blend between medicine and exercise. I think just being humble in your role. Physicians, you know, when we counsel on lifestyle modifications, being understanding that, you know, we don't know it all, you know, especially when it comes to designing a personal training program that's not covered in medical school. Like, it's not, you know, can we tell you what's in the liver and, you know, the enzymes there? You know, sure, but it's not going to help someone, you know, get under a barbell. And to be frank, I think many of my colleagues would agree. I don't think they're comfortable teaching somebody how to do a barbell back squat. It's not covered. And, you know, progressive overload, it's not covered.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like a common sense theme when you're a personal trainer, but it's not something that's actually covered in medical training. And I think an important piece then for physicians is to take a step back and say, that wasn't covered. Somebody else is the expert on this. And, you know, you're there to help guide that conversation. You're there to help the personal trainer, you know, make an effective program to say, hey, this person has heart failure and diabetes. You know, those exercises that you have written down after looking at it maybe on YouTube, if you don't know what those exercises are, and being like, oh, I don't actually want my patient laying flat. That's not good for their heart and lungs. So please adjust. Right. Writing that on a piece of paper and sending it to the personal trainer can help, you know, navigate that. And I think the flip side of that then is for the personal trainer to ask questions, right? You know, like, what do you mean laying flat's not okay? Can they lay on their stomach? Can they lay on their back? You know, my patients or my client's pregnant. Like, what does that mean for their physical activity, you know, level? What can I have them do? What can they not do? And, you know, so I think it's bi-directional that, you know, physicians and trainers, that's what I would want them to kind of, you know, it might have been a long-winded answer to that, but I think it's very important to kind of respect your wheelhouse and respect somebody else's, and just, it should be a collaboration constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely harder for doctors, but I think there's certainly that same feeling. I go back to that term you said, being humble. You know, I've experienced that where, you know, I remember, like I mentioned, my very first client ever, she had PCOS and she was, you know, dealing with obesity. And so for a 19-year-old and this first client, it was daunting, and it all worked out, thankfully. But I remember like the amount of like time and energy, attention I went into, when it probably would have served me better to like contact someone and get like the, you know, the skinny on what to do exactly, or at least just to get some advice to understand it a little bit better. And that's not to discourage coaches from being in the know. Like, you should know, like, generally, like, what is asthma and how it impacts people, you know, type 2 diabetes and some considerations when increasing exercise intensity, and arthritis and how resistance training can impact people. That's important. There's no separating the medical world from the fitness world. But I like how you also said, like, being humble and also like staying in your lane in a respectful way. It's like, you don't have to, nor should you know everything on both sides. And by building those relationships, like, you know, meeting people who are RDs and, you know, registered dietitians rather, and who are doctors and who are psychological counselors, like, that then gives you a network to better serve your client. And I think what happens is, subconsciously or not, or unconsciously or not, you know, there's ego. And so you're like, you know, this person's coming to me, I'm the professional. Even your client might think like my coach or my doctor knows everything. And you feel like you have to provide and be that source that knows everything. And that's impossible. And so to go ask someone else for help, it starts hurting your ego maybe a little bit. Like, man, am I not like, you know, intelligent enough? Am I not like able to serve them enough? And I'd argue it's the opposite. And that to best serve is to stay in your lane relatively, get as good at your craft as possible, and know when you need help, because then you can offshoot all that extra work or work that you literally cannot do anyway, and find someone else who's better at it to help you do it. So being humble, I think, is a huge thing. And the power of saying, I don't know, like, is so good, man. Like, I always tell people, like, if you have a coach that always says they know everything, I put in like one of my red flag posts. It's like, Yeah, I mean, you might have someone who's very knowledgeable, but even myself, someone who's been in the field for, 8 years, it's like that's a little bit of a red flag, man. That makes me think used car salesman. It's like you always have an answer for everything immediately and never like have to look anything up. Little sus, a little sus.
Have an individualized answer that we can take some research that was probably done on a similar patient population or client population, and we can try to apply it to said person, but it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And that research has its limitations. But unfortunately, sometimes what happens is that, large study gets boiled down to a blog post on some random, Google hit, a top 10 search, and it has this opinions and expert opinions kind of intertwined and how they interpreted the literature. And then it's a paragraph at the top that says, this is what this means. And it's not by a professional, it's by a blogger, for the lack of better terms. And then that becomes, for some people, the mantra of like what they're going to interpret that study to mean.
Yeah, and I understand the temptation because people are coming to you, and oftentimes it's the pressures to no fault the client. It's like their expectation, like my doctor knows, my trainer should know the answer to this, and it's like I'd imagine it's similar to any field, but especially in a science and a human science field, where like you said, there is a lot of gray area and nuance. It's like you don't have to know, and nor will you know everything. And so I think if you phrase it the right way about like how you are saying, I don't know, but I'll find the answer for you, and how I want to do you a service, and you stay engaging and entertaining in a productive way, people will have a lot more respect for you in the long term versus like, you have this, like you said, the blog poster who like knows everything and writes the very sexy and appealing article. It's like, man, how do I compete with that? Because they seem confident and knowledgeable. It's like the truth always comes out in the end. And so don't worry about if you don't know it right now, because your honesty and integrity will follow through so long as you can still carry over those soft skills and that engagement and all those other things. So don't worry about what other people are doing in that regard.
Absolutely.
And yeah, man, kind of just the last thing I want to touch on. So, again, as we look through you being kind of in both worlds still actively, which is amazing, where do you see like the future of how exercise and medicine works together? I know you're kind of doing it yourself a little bit with the online clientele and then having that medical background, but is there something you see coming down the pipeline, or like a dream that you have as someone in both worlds? Like, where do you see the future going?
Oh, I have dreams. I have dreams about the health and fitness world, and the, bridging the gaps, much of what, you do too, where we kind of bridge the gaps and be evidence-based in our practice and change the culture, or I should say shift. Yes. But, as far as what I would love to see is a really is personal trainers being part of the healthcare team. Like not necessarily like this kind of soft saying that personal trainers are part of the healthcare setting. I want it to be a thing that you go to a doctor's office and with a physician, and there's a personal trainer that is in-house. We have dietitians in
physical therapists.
Physical therapists, and they each have their expertise and role in helping patients. And I'd love to see that continue to expand as well, to see, more dietitians and more physical therapists in those settings, but personal trainers too. I see no reason why, some of these larger clinics that have, maybe 6 or 7 family practice physicians or sports medicine docs working out of a clinic, and they have one dietitian that's there. Why not have one personal trainer there available? That can say at the end of the visit, you can say, like we always say, like, have a nutritionist come see you before you leave to go over some healthy foods.
Yeah.
Why not have a personal trainer come by and, in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, go through some like 3 or 4 basic physical exercises that they can do and set some realistic, smart goals, right? That they can, achieve, take the stairs, go through tangible goals with patients. And so that's like the long kind of viewpoint. I hope that that's something that we achieve in our lifetimes. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with the personal training that I run, service I run, is trying to start that communication line and make it more natural for both doctors and personal trainers to pick up the phone, and have a person-to-person conversation about a patient's needs, from a fitness standpoint, from a medical standpoint. And, sometimes doctors are good at motivational interviewing. Sometimes they're not. They're not the best person because there are other limiting factors like time. And sometimes a personal trainer is the person that the patient is going to listen to, because there are stereotypes about doctors and stereotypes about personal trainers. And one that may work in a personal trainer's favor is that my doctor just wants to give me prescriptions, and it's a common one where we say, I talked about lifestyle modifications for 2 minutes, and then I prescribed the hypertension medicine, and then the patient left.
Yeah.
And maybe if you spent 20 minutes to talk about how cardiovascular exercise can reduce the need for a pill to treat your hypertension, that person would do it and they wouldn't need the medicine. But time is a limiting factor. And so if we can have that set up to have, a personal trainer that has hundreds of these conversations about how we can get them active in that setting right there, they may want to listen to that. They may listen to that, love it, exercise, not need hydrochlorothiazide or whatever that, hypertension medicine that's being prescribed at the time is. And I think they would really appreciate that too.
It's one of those things. I've had this conversation before with one of my professors about how do we move that needle forward? Like, I've been to conferences where they talk about at ACSM where certain clinics or outpatient places may have like a gym adjacent to it, where maybe patients can get prescribed or told to go there afterwards. I wonder if it's like, do we keep personal training certifications the way they are for like the general public, but maybe make a licensure for the medical field? And if that's not already available, if that is already available, maybe this isn't a new idea, but hey, if you want to work like in a doctor's office or in a hospital, a licensed coach, a licensed fitness professional, and then having like a fitness facility on site at every hospital to where, for the patients who are able to, of course, right, IVs and medical complications aside, you can go to the personal trainer, just like how when the PT walks in or when the dietitian walks in, it's like, hey, at 2 p.m. today, you're scheduled to go down to the gym. There are 2-3 trainers on staff who constantly are there for you. They have like your file on, they have notes from the doctor, and they're going to run you through a 30-minute program for the day. Like, that to me would be extraordinarily beneficial. And I know with licensure, it gets sticky because it's like, is it a state by state thing? It's more money and resources, and it's going to be a barrier to entry. But I think as of right now, I've come to the conclusion that I'd rather have less people, but are more qualified. And as you like start making it more difficult to get there, probably the level of care is higher versus having a lot of bodies. And it's just like lower quality of training and like maybe not as like valued of what they want to do. So I think that's possibly a route it could go if it's not already happening. So we'll see.
I like that. I mean, that if I could second another dream would be, I'm looking at my patient's chart and it says, I see the note from the physical therapist, and then right underneath it, I see a note from the personal trainer. The patient went down to the hospital gym. This is what we did, and, I don't think it's a revelation that exercise would probably decrease hospital stay, decrease total cost of care, decrease complications, all of those things. I mean, there's plenty of research on the matter of like exercising before a major abdominal surgery and what does that lead to afterwards, or adequate nutrition prior to surgery, and post-operatively. We talk about like a simple complication like a blood clot in the legs, from laying in bed and not getting up. They talk about that for airplanes, right? If you sit on an airplane for a long period of time, everyone's like, oh, you're going to get a blood clot. And so it's, stand up, walk around. And that's essentially the treatment or preventative measure that you can take for that. And so after an operation, we walk around and we're like, did you get up and walk today? It's a simple question that we're asking because we're really wanting to prevent blood clots and many other things that come with basics of just getting up and walking around. And so I would love to see a personal trainer walking in and saying, hey, you're scheduled for some exercise today with me, and we're going to go to the gym downstairs. But like you said, the barrier to entry, I think, is a interesting discussion on how to make this happen. As far as like my personal training practice, it's definitely something that I'm actively trying to figure out myself, in the trainers that I kind of bring aboard to work with, because I want trainers that are as excited as me to learn this stuff. But with that, there's not as many, it's harder to find. There's a lot of trainers that are excited and, really good at what they do, but it's harder to find trainers that you can look at and say, I trust you to ask questions when you need help, to actively learn, and, to do that. It's a little harder to find, I feel like.
Yeah, man. But I ultimately think, your passion and purpose of being, in both fields, you're going to draw those people to you, man. And so I'm very excited to see your continuation through residency and ultimately like where the coaching side of things goes, man. Like I said, that makes me very excited to see that you're still in both worlds. So, props to you, man. And I'm going to keep tabs and make sure I see how it's going. And best of luck to you in all things, my man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Do you want to let the people know anything that you want to plug, where people can find you? I know you mentioned that website that you have again, if you want to mention that as well.
Sure. Finding me, I have a website, path2.fit. That's where you'll find all of the personal training services that me and my team will offer. I don't have a social media presence yet for kind of the professional aspect. I do have a book that's out on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. It is called Fitness Made Simple. And it basically is kind of a simplified text. I shouldn't really even call it a text. It's not a textbook. Please don't look at it like a textbook. It's a book on essentially just finding your fitness journey and getting started. And it kind of goes through some research, but it's pretty bird's eye perspective of the research. We get into some nitty gritty, but it's really about making those first steps towards your fitness journey. The thing that I will quote at the end of it is a thing called the Path to Fit principles, which are kind of the 10 small steps or principles I like to say are important. I won't bore us with going through all 10 of them right now, but essentially it's the simple stuff. So drinking water, and why, right? We'll talk about the cognitive stuff that we mentioned here too, about how exercise and sleep have a bi-directional relationship. And so if you want to check it out, it's on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. It's called Fitness Made Simple. And I think that's really all that I have for plugs that I would mention.
Awesome, man. I'll be sure to put all those links down in the description below for y'all to check it out. Again, y'all know where to find me: Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts at _shift_method. Again, we got 2 videos every week, a YouTube style and a podcast style. So be sure to check those out. The website, theshiftmethod.org, for all the apparel, for all the programming, for all the consultations that y'all might be interested in. Just click any of those take action buttons and I'll be able to get back to you with some coaching inquiries. So we got doctor, coach, and author, Punit. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for your time, man. You enjoy that day off, all right?
Well, I will. Thank you so much for having me, Damien. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Later, everyone.